if Jim makes it. He might have shown up at 7 on Monday and missed it, so. If you don't mind, Beth, let's do a roll call. Oh, sorry, calling the meeting to order at 2:32.
Okay. Austin,
Present.
DiDonato, Dombrowski,
Present.
Jacobson,
Here.
Rosenthal,
Here.
Todd.
Hello.
And for CCS, we have Rebecca Malinowski, Deborah Wishmeyer, and Beth Stone.
Does anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, do we have any public comment? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve minutes of the March 10th Budget and Finance Committee meeting?
I motion. Dombrowski.
And a second, do
I'll second Jacobson.
we have any discussion? Hearing none, let's have a vote.
Austin,
Yes.
Dombrowski,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Rosenthal,
Yes.
Todd.
All right, Rebecca, take it away on our next year's budget recommendation.
Yes, so as I noted in my email to you all, we did make some changes to the budget based on the discussion we had at the last meeting, but we did not change the overall library billings amount. So that is still flat from last year and will be divided amongst one additional library now that we've got our pals Warren Newport on deck. So we had a couple of small changes to maintenance agreements. And I did bump up the salary line and then the additional lines a little bit based on my previous math error. Man, the staff would really get me if I made a math error on the salaries line in that direction. So thank you for your work on that. And then this is a very high estimate, but since on site improvements in the development fund, per Lauren's suggestion, I added some funds here in case we need some additional work done in the new space. I don't think it would be anywhere near that amount, but since we're not actually billing for these funds, I feel like it can't hurt to budget that amount, and we'd surely discuss with, if nothing else, at least executive committee before running around town spending thousands of dollars. So I'm happy to take questions on anything, but most of it is the same as our last meeting, so I don't want to belabor if you all feel confident.
Anyone have any comments, questions? We're still looking at no increase in library billings. All right, if there's no other questions or comments, then we could have a motion to approve.
If we could hang on just a second and look at the total membership billings, just so we feel comfortable including that in the billings. The summary tab is red here because it's not updated yet, as we don't have the full amounts from OCLC. But if we look at the CCS membership tab, I'll write this out for governing board as well. I wrote it out for Indian Trails previously, and I'll write it out again. Warren Newport looks different. You can see here we don't have like those same percent holes, and that's because we adjust for them over here on our new library worksheet. So we look at our average income with Warren Newport included and assign them their percentage, which is 4.5% of total income. And then we figure their total annual amount here, but it is prorated for the first few months as they'll still be in implementation. So we get their total, which is just over $56,000. And then we subtract that from the total billings up here, and then address everybody else based on that reduced amount. And then next year they'll be built in, because we'll have a similar situation with Mount Prospect next year. Well, they'll have some prorated months, but it's nice that we're able to include that all in the budget. So you can see that immediate reduction in fees instead of, funds going into development with an unbudgeted library and then like a rebate and all of that. So, so that is why their line looks different and why the total billings up here doesn't match what's on the first page. Are there questions about that? Okay, and then on OCLC fees, we're just waiting on a couple more libraries, but again, we don't have the full amount from our pals at OCLC yet. This is an estimate. Monica, I'm going to call you out right in the middle of the meeting. Your number looks really high, so we might want to double check that before governing board, but that's fine. Glenview's number also is a big jump, but Lindsay emailed me separately to say that she's confident in this number and that she knows that it's a big increase.
What is that? What is that number for?
This is your expenditures that you reported yesterday.
What you just submitted this morning. Mhm.
Yeah, I know the physical materials was accurate. I got the digital number from my adult services manager but it's not that much more than we spent last year, so I'm not sure what might be wrong.
We'll follow up. We definitely don't want to sneak price gouge anyone, so I'll pull that result and pull your previous year as well to see kind of where how that difference shakes out, and I can send that back. So we do a little sanity check when we get these in. And again, we use a 3-year average. So you have the previous 3-year average here. So you can see even when you do have a big jump, there is some smoothing that happens there. Warren Newport, we're not using a 3-year average, though I will ask them to confirm this number because it is at least a year old, because that's when they submitted their application. So I'll get a fresh number from them as well. But as you can see, most libraries will see an increase in OCLC because Warren Newport had been, according to CCS standards, overpaying. But Glenview does see a big increase because, again, their spending went up and that cost went up. Winnetka, your number's out of whack, so we'll adjust that. But for most of them, it's a pretty manageable cost increase. We can come back to this in a minute, but I just want to show when we're talking about OCLC, we talked a little bit about smoothing and we can talk more about it. But I wanted to show if we assume that both Waukegan and Mount Prospect join next year, this is what our newest library's standalone costs would be. And then this is what they're redistributed with CCS. And so when we look at all of them as a whole, it's a relatively modest change, especially when we look at dividing that amongst, 24, legacy members, let's call them. So again, we do see this bump with Warren Newport because their cost is coming down. Mount Prospect will be taking on a lot more cost. And then depending on what happens with Waukegan, and I'm not settled on that being Waukegan's cost either, but that's the first quote we got from OCLC for them. So I just wanted to share that additional context. If there are questions about membership fees or OCLC fees, I'm happy to take those and turn it back to Lauren.
Doesn't sound like there's any questions. That seems very clear. And your math all makes sense. I appreciate that. The explanation, that is, I like getting into the nitty gritty of it. So if there's no questions, we're ready for a motion. And if I, yes, you have that lovely sheet with the suggested motions, which I think we all find helpful. I know I find helpful.
I move to recommend the FY 23-24 budget and total billings as presented to the governing board for approval.
Do we have a second?
I'll
This is
second.
Anthony, I'll second.
Anthony will second.
Thanks, Mick.
Perfect. Then can we have a vote, please, Beth?
Austin,
Yes.
Dombrowski,
Approve.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Rosenthal,
Yes.
Todd.
Cha-ching.
Oh, sorry. Great. The motion carries. Thank you. Lovely to have the budget taken care of for as far as this committee is concerned. Moving on to the development fund list.
So since you last looked at this list, I did add this OCLC smoothing chunk of funds. When I actually pulled these numbers all together, it honestly wasn't as bad as I thought. It's just that like give and take of like when members join, like it's kind of luck of the draw, right? Depending on who wants to join and when they want to join, if we're going to see an increase or the decrease. So when I looked at just these costs, I was like, I don't know, we don't even really need to put this on the development fund. But there's nothing to say like another Morton Grove or the opposite of Palatine won't be the next library that wants to join. So I think it's reasonable to keep to like mark this as a potential use, but I wouldn't factor it. We wouldn't do both the B&T CAT or OCLC alternative and necessarily need the OCLC smoothing. So I wouldn't say like this is a huge impact that we need to, you know, bill special for the development fund or withhold a rebate or anything like that. I think where we're at with our ending balances is great for both operating and development without any transfers planned for next year. And whether we keep this OCLC smoothing in or out, it doesn't impact that. So I feel like it's just as well to have it in as an option for discussion if it came up.
It doesn't make a difference if we put that $50,000 in for a rebate or not rebating to the libraries. Like we're
Correct. So
right?
Yeah, with or without it, we had planned to do the rails rebate. We could do a development rebate, but we don't have to budget for it given where our ending balance is.
Right.
And whether we have that in there or not, it could go either way. We could, you know, whittle down the balance a little bit more, or we can leave it as is.
Where are we on the balance again?
Let me pop that back up. So our projected final balance this year is about $470,000. Our projected balance next year is a little lower, but again, that includes a relatively generous component here, that two relatively generous components that we may not use. But it's well within the under the midpoint of the funds that we want to keep.
So besides the Rails LSAP grant rebate, that we're not going to rebate anything. So that $50,000 can be a placeholder and it doesn't affect one thing or one way or the other. So having it there is fine as far as I'm concerned. Like if it was affecting a
Yes.
rebate or something like that, then I might want to have a stronger conversation around it. But like, since it doesn't, it's like a good placeholder.
Yeah,
in my
I agree.
opinion.
All right, so I think this, these planned uses for the development fund all make sense with, you know, either definite uses or potential uses. I mean, that's what it's for, is to, you know, figure what we can do next year. So,
The question I have about like, because we're doing the OCLC smoothing, a lot of it has to do with like Waukegan coming in. Are they actually coming in? Like, do we believe strongly that they're
So
coming?
Waukegan is very interested. They and we were concerned about what their OCLC cost would come in at because they're not a current member. So the quote that we got today, or yesterday rather, is $17,000, which is artificially high, I think. But I don't think that it's, Tiffany at Waukegan was concerned that like we'd turn them away if their OCLC cost was too high. And I don't think that we're at that point. If Waukegan doesn't join, your cost will look better next year than if Waukegan does join
For OCLC, but for the
for
other,
OCLC.
for our overall library, we'd be saving money on that side too.
Yeah, I do anticipate next year we will see an increase in the overall billings because we will have more licenses that we need to pay for overall. And that will kind of hit next year. But again, we're dividing among more members, and I don't think that libraries will individually see increases.
That makes sense to me. Thank you.
This isn't super related to OCLC smoothing, but if you'll indulge me for like a quick minute, some additional context, Rachel has been working with OCLC to get a quote outside of the group services contract so we could reduce services. If we, as we talked about last meeting, if we were going to go with like Baker and Taylor or Sky River as an alternative to OCLC. As you can see from the front page of this quote, it's costs us additional money because why wouldn't it? We did have a meeting with OCLC this morning, and we have requested that they go back to the drawing board on these numbers. But this is a helpful. So we expected that they would like fully re-quote all of our libraries from what the group services cost is, but essentially they just removed any group services discount and made some increases. But you can see Palatine here is still vastly underpaying. They just bumped Palatine up to the minimum. Like their minimum cost is $1,000 a year. So they didn't actually re-quote and say, oh, well, Highland Park super overpays with their $37,000 a year. Let's bump that down. But I think this is just a helpful illustration as to why that smoothing could be necessary. Like, again, if it was Highland Park that was trying to join, you know, this is a huge cost for us to absorb, given their spending. I can try to get some information from IHLS on what standalones in our area are paying for OCLC, essentially our potential members that haven't really expressed interest, to see, you know, maybe it isn't super necessary that we have this. But again, we are asking them to go back to the drawing board on this, because if we're reducing services, it certainly shouldn't cost more money. But just like a helpful little foray into what's going on behind OCLC. True mystery.
Evil.
Do they really even understand what's going on, like OCLC?
I don't think so. So we met today. Deborah, do you remember Suzanne's title? I do not. But we met with, she's not like the bottom rung salesperson. She's at least one step above that, right? Like some sort of supervisor, director or something. And they couldn't tell us. I was like, well, is the metric service population, or is the metric use, or is the metric what it's always been? And they're like, well, it's like a combination.
There's
So,
no combination that nets Palatine $382.
Yeah, it's bonkers. So Rachel is working diligently on her alternatives to OCLC project. So, you know, we'll continue to do that work. I am going to put a call out on the directors list to see if any libraries who are in the group services contract have successfully filed an appeal. What we did learn today is that even within the group services contract, individual libraries can request an appeal for repricing. So we could send, like, we could identify who we think are like overspent and send, okay, Highland Park, go do this and go through that process. But I want to understand a little bit more what it looks like before I start asking libraries to do that. So it's possible we can bring our overall costs down to some degree, but we've had 2 meetings with OCLC about costs. And I mean, I feel like these meetings are not super helpful for OCLC because I just leave them frustrated and feeling like they're being deliberately difficult. It's hard to blame the people who are sitting on the call because they're saying they're getting the pricing from someone else. But I'm like, okay, let's talk to those people. Like, who do we need to talk to fully understand this? And they're just not. I can send it to the group. There's a consortium, I believe it's an academic consortium that's like posted an open letter to OCLC on their website saying like, we've been trying to get like transparent and fair pricing from OCLC and we've been getting stonewalled at every turn and like, here's everything we've done. And now we're going public, which is interesting, but again, kind of reiterates, unless they're losing customers, I don't think that they're motivated to make any changes. So I'm interested to see how Rachel's investigation pans out and to have a discussion with governing board on where we're willing to compromise. Because OCLC, honestly, I think OCLC is the best at what they do if we look at purely a functionality point of view. But is that functionality worth the cost? I don't know. So what are we willing to take on in maybe additional staff time because the macros aren't as good, or something like a slightly different workflow because it, isn't quite as efficient. I don't know. So that's kind of what we're looking at because it's not sustainable. They also said that the group services contract has standard increases, which at least in my time at CCS, we have not gotten standard increases. They have varied. And that if we left the group services contract, we'd be subject to whatever increases, they felt like. So anyway, that was what we've learned so far. It has not been creating optimism within me, is what I will say.
I think Monica put it well.
Evil.
No. Is that everything with the development fund?
Yes, unless there are further questions or concerns.
Everyone comfortable with this? Yeah, well, we'll have a motion to approve the development fund budget for the next year.
I have a quick question before we do a motion.
Yes, please.
So the potential to offset cost of new library membership and OCLC smoothing, can't that just be combined? I mean, is it essentially the same thing, or if I know one's about OCLC and one's about new library membership, but it's serving the same purpose.
Yeah, I think they could be combined. I guess they would have different triggers. So if the Rails new member catalog grant was no longer available, we would want to discuss if we want to help incoming members offset those one-time costs that they'd taken. So yeah, I mean, yes, they're both about new members, different triggers. I'm fine with one pot with, a note as this could be bigger than like a 2-word bullet point, right? It could say potential to offset costs of new library membership, such as, losing the Rails grant or facilitating some smoothing of OCLC.
Maybe next year.
Maybe next, okay.
Yeah.
I'll make that motion to approve the list of potential uses for the development fund.
Do we have a second?
Second, Alex.
Perfect. We have a motion and a second. Can we please get a roll call vote, Beth?
And just to confirm, that's as presented, right? We're not making that change. We're not amending.
That's
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Austin,
Yes.
Dombrowski,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Rosenthal,
Yes.
Todd.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Moving on, fiscal accountability policy revision.
So per the discussion that we had last meeting, I've updated the routine banking section to kind of remove the emphasis off checks and to say that ACH payments are preferred. CCS initiated ACH payments are preferred. It clarifies and leaves in that vendor initiated payments that we want to do kind of without approvals need to be approved individually by executive committee. And then there was some other language change in here. The statutory amount for RFPs was changed to 25,000, right? Previously.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's just a kind of housekeeping. We've got pronouns moving from his, her to their, and then just a couple of language changing. There are a few financial matters that executive committee can handle. So I've just clarified that under general. I'm happy to take questions, make changes, etc.
But I was happy to read this because we're looking at this in the context of performing more payments via ACH. And so we didn't want to get too detailed in here because we don't want it to be a this is what you must do kind of a thing. But I think this is broad enough to explain our goals without getting into the procedures level, which is not what we want. So I appreciate, Rebecca, you taking care of that. Does anyone have any questions or comments about the updates?
Is there, can you scroll back up just a hair, Rebecca? Little bit more. I think there was a word missing. Roll call action shall be taken governance on all financial matters. That's the only thing I noticed.
Thank you.
Mhm.
If there's no other comments or questions, I'll entertain a motion to approve the fiscal accountability policy as updated.
I motion to approve the revised fiscal accountability policy as amended.
And second,
I'll second.
perfect. Beth, can we please get a roll call vote?
Austin,
Yes.
Dombrowski,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Rosenthal,
Yes,
and Todd.
Yes.
Thank you.
perfect. We're I just met with Wintrust yesterday, talking to them about their integrated payables, and this, it looks like a really, as Alex mentioned at our last committee meeting, it just looks like a really good product, a way to save Beth time, a way to assure that our payments will only go to the vendors for which they're being sent. It looks like a really good process. So something we can work towards in the future. Not anything you need to worry about in the middle of moving locations. So something to put on the plate for the future. All right, is there any other matters to come before the committee? Otherwise, do we need a motion to adjourn? I never remember this. Nope, then let's adjourn at 3:01. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.